Hello, welcome to Ukraine Today. Joining us now on the programme is Emine Dzheppar, a Ukrainian activist and advisor to the Ministry of Information on Crimean issues. Thank you very much for coming into our studio to Viewpoint.
Thank you.
So you're working within the ministry to help advise them on how to deal with what's happening in Crimea. So my first question today is, what sort of strategy, firstly, do you have on giving this information? What are your sources?
Yeah. There are several. Again, we have a strategy, and this is the main issue, that the government does not have a strategy on Crimea, but we have an information strategy on Crimea of how to deal with occupation territory. So let's say that the first issue that we're trying to cover is Ukraine. We're working with this consciousness of Ukrainians and of their understanding of Crimea, because we have so many myths and stereotypes on Crimea and Crimean Tatars, because many Ukrainians do believe that, let's say, Crimean Tatars or inhabitants of Crimea fully and absolutely supported the annexation of Crimea and were happy to be in Russian Federation, and they do not know the history of boycotting the referendum. So Russia, and it is a part of Russian propaganda to make the whole world believe that every single inhabitant of Crimea is now happy with what's going on.
And this was wrong. That even at the time of the election, it was quite well known that the result was fictitious, and even afterwards, the actual results were
published. Let me give you a case.
Published.
We had this huge and massive rally on 26th of February when approximately 15,000 of Crimean Tatars and Ukrainians, they went to they hit the building of Crimean Parliament, and they did not let the Crimean Parliament to vote for official legalization of some kind of entrance of Russian Federation. So there was a formula to invite Russian Federation and to find a legal formula to Russian Federation to enter Crimea. But that rally, actually, it changed the history, and it changed the way of the strategy of Russian Federation of dealing with Crimea. So after that, right after that rally, on 27th of February, Russian Federation was forced to apply, let's say, a military way to
seize the land.
To seize the land.
And the key government buildings.
Because Majlis destroyed this illusion and did not let Russian Federation to make everyone believe that the support is 100%, because this is not true.
Yeah, and many of the court cases that are still going on, for example, to ban the Majlis, actually are still based on what happened 2 years ago.
There are several criminal cases in Crimea that is now applied to Crimean Tatars. So the first one is the criminal case of 26th of February, the one that showed up right after that rally, because the prosecutor general claims that 2 people died because of the rally and because of Majlis. And we have 8 victims of that case, and 3 of them are still they are arrested. So they are in this, they are jailed for 1 year. And we have Akhtem Chigos, the deputy of head of Majlis, who is now charged with this responsibility on death of those 2 people during the rally. But actually, it is not proved that those people died on that rally, and also he could have up to 20 years of prison.
Yeah, so it is a bit like a pseudo court.
Yes.
I wanted to move on to talk about Crimea on a larger, broader issue almost, because now we have the war that's going on in eastern Ukraine, and this is the main thing that really is in the headlines, not just around the world, but in Ukraine as well. So what about Crimea? Many people have forgotten about this.
Bingo. This is a question that has an answer in a way, because as far as I understand the politics of Russian Federation, it was done on purpose. So it's so-called matryoshka. So they annexed Crimea, then they launched the war on the east of Ukraine. It was so that they bite the finger they bite the hand to have the finger. Because when we have a war, the whole attention goes to the war and to the victims of war. And all those repressions in Crimea are somehow not important for, let's say, Ukrainians and for the whole world. And on the international level, the Russian Federation and the diplomats of Russian Federation, as a serviceman of this whole propaganda, they're trying to convince the world that it's impossible to resolve, let's say, Syrian issue without Russian Federation as a partner of, let's say, Western world, or it's impossible to resolve the issue of Islamic State without Russian Federation. So they're trying to be a partner of Western world and to kind of, you know, to make Crimea unseen. Kind of.
So it's like a side issue because you have all these
Yes.
issues going on in the world. As you said, you had Syria.
They're trying to make everyone believe there's much more bigger evil than annexation of Crimea.
Yeah, but what about Ukraine, though? Because Ukraine has had almost 2 years to come up with some sort of way to bring the Crimean problem to light. I mean, for example, now in organizations like the UN Security Council, in the International Criminal Court, they talk a lot about what's happening in Donbass, but not so much about Crimea. Why do you think this is?
Well, Ukraine for me today is a kind of 2-year-old infant or a 2-year-old child that only learns how to work, because it was before it was always pretty much dependent on official Kremlin, and today it's within the statehood issues. It's only on the path of getting responsibility on its shoulders. There are certain steps on Crimean Tatars. Let's say that they recognized the deportation of Crimean Tatars as a genocide. They recognized us as an indigenous people of Crimea and Ukraine, which had never been before on the political discourse, and this is very important issues. They're trying also, we had this European Parliament resolution on Crimean Tatars, 70 times mentioning Crimean Tatars as indigenous people, which is really extremely important for us. So there was a UN General Assembly resolution on Crimea, and also we had the President's speech maybe 2 months ago saying that there is an attempt to find a format for discussions on Crimea, so-called Geneva Plus format. It's not working by now as we see it, but also we had the meeting of Majlis leaders on September 22nd who requested the diplomats to somehow to promote the issue at the international level, and the main idea of that meeting was that you should not split up Crimea and Minsk. Like, let's say that it's again 2 puzzle pieces of one picture that let's say war on the east of Ukraine could not be possible without annexation. So annexation of Crimea is the only step number 1. So
and it's a big project as well, because not only do you have the Crimean Tatars, but also there's certain legal problems. You have a lot of Ukrainian property that's in Crimea. You have UNESCO World Heritage Sites. I mean, how do you sort that out? So it's a long process.
It's about 220 items of was nationalized. Well, let's say on the federal level. But so what could you expect? The whole territory is under the authority, under the occupation. So Russia is responsible for everything that is going on in Crimea on humanitarian level, on legal level, like on every level. So when we say that this territory does not by fact or de facto belong to Ukraine, so everything on the territory is Crimea is somehow now under the jurisdiction of Russian Federation.
Yeah. What about maybe like an agreement between Ukraine and Russia at a later date? I read an interesting blog recently that said that some sort of negotiations between the two countries could, it was just an opinion, that's all.
No, this is...
What do you think about that?
That's impossible, because
so?
Crimea is Ukraine, and officially Ukraine, like showing that there are any kind of negotiations is showing their weakness. And I don't think that Ukraine is weak, is that much weak, to somehow sacrifice Crimea. What I know is that many Ukrainian leaders, they know that Crimea is a part of Ukraine, and they're trying to somehow deal with that. So when they say that the territorial integrity of Ukraine is the main agenda for them, so it means that Ukraine cannot be as a state without Crimea. So there are no way for any kind of negotiations on giving Crimea to Russia or recognizing the status quo in Crimea now.
Yeah. Do you think that your views are reflected in the powers in Kiev?
Of course, but let's say
but is
my
it possible,
minister...
though? It's going to cost the resources that you would need to get Crimea back to fully reintegrate it into Ukraine would cost billions. Do you think that...
It's not an issue of money.
No?
Absolutely. It's an issue of status. It's an issue of territorial integrity. It's an issue of democracy, let's say. How could you, if someone takes your hand and saying, oh, can you live without your hand? So what would you do? Would you strike for your hand? Of course you would. Of course we should also understand that Ukraine was not ready for that. So really, for 2 years they cannot come up with any kind of comprehensive understanding of how to deal with Crimea, what to do with Crimea, or how to de-occupy. I know that it's pretty much dependent on international influences, because it's only because, as I told you, giving that analogy that Ukraine is now a kind of 2-year-old infant. So they're pretty much dependent on international, it's not a pressure, but kind of, let's say, advice.
Support, almost, to see what's going to happen in the future. Okay, well, thank you very much for your time and for coming into our studio. It's very interesting to talk to you about Crimea.
Thank you, Tom.
That was Emine Dzheppar, a Ukrainian activist and advisor to the Ministry of Information on Crimean issues. Now, back to the news.